Welcome back to More Than Our Story, where our mission is to share uplifting stories from inspirational people. Our next guest is the definition of resilience. Today, I'm joined by Mark Opauszky. Mark, I'm honored to be speaking with you today, and I want to thank you for sharing your time and your story.
Daniel, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So why don't you tell us about your story and your journey that has brought you here today?
Well, it's a long story, but it's also a short story. And the short version is 5 years ago, I became unexpectedly ill with what I originally thought was the flu. I was in New York City at the time. I was there to do a speaking engagement and just really didn't feel great. It was flu season. It was February. And the flu got really bad, and I wound up passing out in my hotel room. Paramedics were called. I went to the hospital. Initially, people thought I had the flu, but when my lab test came back, it was much, much worse than that. And I woke up 5 weeks later, after having been on life support and in a coma, and my whole body was destroyed. Organs, limbs, lungs, everything was just a giant mess. And that's the reality that I phased back into. And I had to start getting my hands around exactly what had happened to me. And, how was I supposed to recover from something like this? And, it took a long time. And now here I am. During that time, when I was in the coma, I had ostensibly expired at least twice. They gave me a very, very low chance of survival. This had been explained to my wife that I probably wasn't going to come back, and if I did survive, I wouldn't be the same person cognitively or physically or any other which way. So it was extremely bad. And yet here I am today, grateful and happy to be speaking to you about it, and frankly, sharing my story with anybody in any way that can help.
So what is it exactly that you contracted, and do you know how you came by contracting that?
So this is where the story gets fun and a little more interesting. Originally, much to my surprise, it was caused by necrotizing fasciitis, which most people recognize as the flesh-eating disease. It's a horrifying sounding thing. I'd never really known very much about it. I'd always thought that it was something that happens if you had some really nasty wound that went uncared for a very long time, et cetera, et cetera. As it turns out, you can, in very, very, very rare situations, contract it, even if you don't have an open wound. In my case, the theory is that the previous Friday, I had fallen while skiing. Rather silly for a person my age. I was trying to, beat my friend's time down a racing run at a local ski hill. And I looked up at the bottom to see what my time was. And I wasn't paying attention, and my ski caught a gate, and it spun me around, and I banged my knee, and I felt silly, and I got up and I skied for the rest of the day. But the following Monday, when I was already starting to feel the flu, my knee was killing me, like it was killing me. So the prevailing theory is that the bruise or the hematoma in that area became, and again, very unlikely, a sort of a breeding ground for a strep A bacteria that was probably everywhere because it was flu season. And 1 in 10 million shot, it just got angry, wakes up the wrong way, and started trying to kill me. It results in an extremely high fever, 104, 105. You start to boil your brain. The pain is overwhelming. And that is what triggers the cascading effect that results in over 50% of the cases right away in death within 48 hours. So necrotizing fasciitis, idiopathic. We don't know where it came from, what happened, other than it seems to have settled in a bruise in my body. I'd never been sick before. I mean, ever really. I can't remember the last time I was in a hospital. And suddenly there I am with this condition. Now, I didn't find this out until days after I woke up, like as I was trying to put the story back together again. And even when I was first brought into the emergency room, no one was really sure what it was. Even for a busy Manhattan hospital, they might have seen 2 cases like this in the last 5 or 10 years. That's how rare it was. So it wasn't until they had done some blood panels and an MRI that they sort of came back, and then all of a sudden everything just exploded into activity, and they were racing me into surgery to try to cut out the infection. And that's how the entire journey started.
So when you woke up, what was your first thought on, the seriousness of everything that had gone on, and how were you able to process that crazy life-changing near-death experience?
Well, again, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Waking up is one thing. You sort of phase back into reality, and it's a bit like waking up from a dream. And I remember opening my eyes. I remember a room full of people. All their faces are staring at you. And for all those of us who've been in a hospital bed, and when you can't move or anything, you just see these faces leaning into your field of vision, all with these different, very concerned or very happy expressions on their faces. And everyone is just smiling away, like something amazing had just happened. And the doctor leans over and he says to me, you're in a hospital. We need to extubate you. We're gonna take this breathing tube out of you. You've been on life support. And he sort of says, to his credit, he goes, this isn't going to be pleasant. And so it's like having a vacuum cleaner hose ripped out of your lungs, right? Like it's this thing. And then, you try to take your first breath and nothing really works right. And I tried to say something humorous or funny or something, but I couldn't talk. Nothing worked. And then I just sort of passed out. And I don't really remember much after that for a couple of days. But then it started to come back in. The problem was when you come out of a coma like I was in, you have this profound amnesia. I mean, your internal dialogue is intact, but you're not quite sure what your name is. You're not quite sure how you got here. You're in a hospital. You're probably in trouble. Something happened, but I didn't recognize my wife right away. I didn't know what year it was. They were giving me all these cognitive tests, which I kept failing, apparently. And I couldn't really speak very well. Speaking was a bit like, imagine you're in a football stadium at one end, you'd have to shout for somebody at the other end to hear you. But in reality, the words are barely coming out. Mm-hmm. So you really had to pick your words very carefully. So a lot of it was just kind of putting my brain back together again in pieces. You start out with, okay, I know I'm in trouble. I can't move. I can't talk. I really don't feel very well. I'm in an awful lot of pain, which I can't explain to anybody. I know I'm supposed to know who these people are. I'm not quite sure. And you don't want to panic because you're like, well, just work the problem. We gotta start putting reality back together again. And after a couple of days, with a little bit of sleep and a bit more healing and a bit more oxygen to my brain, things start to make sense again. I recognize my wife. I started understanding. I started listening to what the doctors were saying. And I started to understand that I had contracted a terrible infection, that I had slipped into septic shock at least twice, possibly 3 times, which is very difficult to recover from. I'd had multiple surgeries, and that things weren't going to go well. My kidneys were not functioning. My heart had been under a lot of strain. It's called soft heart syndrome. And so there was damage to the heart muscle. And so I had cardiologists that were worried about the condition of my heart. I was going to be put on a transplant list for my liver, which also was failing. And so that was probably the most life-threatening thing at the time. They were still quite convinced that I would have cognitive issues because I'd had such low blood pressure for a long time. So there was that. I had a collapsed lung, which nobody figured out for at least 3 or 4 days. And my arms and legs had turned black from lack of oxygen to my extremities, which was part of the treatment when I was on life support, was to try to keep my blood pressure up and try to keep blood pressure in my brain and in my organs. And so it does that at the expense of your limbs. And so it became apparent that I might lose my arms and legs at the same time. And then to boot, I remember one morning they were going to do a dressing change on my leg. This is the leg that had been hurting. And so, they take off all the dressings, and this is extremely painful. And I couldn't figure out why, because I wasn't exactly sure what had happened. And you get to see your leg, and not to be too graphic about it, but it looked like I'd been attacked by a shark. Like I could see my complete tibia, and I could see sections of femur. I could, there were muscles and tendons all over the place in places they didn't belong. They had basically gutted it out. They'd gone very aggressively to try to cut out the infection. And so there just wasn't any tissue on it. And I thought to myself, how am I supposed to heal from that? And so it's a lot, right, to try to organize in your head. I'd say it probably took about 4 or 5 days for all of that information to sort of get into my head, and for me to be able to parse it in some kind of an order that I could start thinking about it in an organized way. So that's what waking up was a succession of oh, really? Oh, are you kidding? And like I said, I can't really talk very well at this point. I've still got feeding tubes in me. I've got 2 central lines. I got stuff in my veins. I'm on permanent dialysis. So I got this dialysis machine that's hooked up to me. So there's still a lot of equipment in the room, and so you can't really communicate. People are sort of explaining things to you, and you're just kind of nodding, like, all right, okay, yep, yeah, I'm messed up. Happy to be here, but messed up. So that's what waking up was.
So there's your physical health, there's your emotional health. How about your mental health? How was that impacted? And how long did it kind of take to realize mentally the state you were in?
It could just be I was fortunate because the coma for me went on for a very long time. Different people who've been in comas describe different situations, but for me, it was a bizarre dream state that went on for I swear, in my mind, 2 to 3 years. That's how long I felt like I was in a coma for in real time. So weirdly, even though I didn't know my name, didn't know who I was, didn't have any sense of my arms and my legs or any other real things, you are still you inside that time, floating around like a ball of consciousness in an ocean. And that's what it was like. So believe it or not, I'd had a lot of time to think even before I woke up and got all this stuff. And during that time, and I remember it all very vividly. I remember all those memories from being in the coma vividly. I'd contemplated whether I was alive. I'd contemplated whether I was dead. I remember spending what was to me 6 months just thinking about whether or not I'm dead. And then I spent 6 months wondering what, well, if I'm not dead, then am I supposed to be doing something? Because I'm just sitting here, like I'm just sitting here thinking. Of course, this is probably just a matter of a week or two or three, but for me, it seemed like an eternity. Time didn't really have a thing, and I had no, there's no connection between my body and my mind. So by the time I woke up, and I still remembered all this. I'd had a lot of time to myself, and I think I was just kind of happy to be here. And when I realized, when that element of the reality where I have a wife and 2 children phased back into my head, I was like, "You've got kids, man." It's like, right, where are the kids? Like, they must be lonely and horrified and scared. And you start to think about these things almost right away. And so I would have done anything just to spend 15 minutes with my kids, even if that was the last thing that I did, And so that became the prevailing thought. Everything else was sort of secondary, to be perfectly honest. So I don't recall feeling angry or scared, or any of those things that I would have expected that I would have felt, or horrified, or even diminished at that point. I was just pleased to be back in my body, experiencing the world, albeit in a horrifying, altered way, and angling towards a chance to hopefully very soon see my children again. And that was just kind of the prevailing consideration. Does that make sense?
It does. It's almost like it's a good thing that you went through all the stages of grief while you were unconscious in your head. So when you woke up, you were more in the gratitude and mindfulness, want to get back to my family.
Maybe that was it. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that was it. I mean, it's amazing because certainly after I was I stayed in 2 ICUs. I was in one ICU in Manhattan, where they basically stabilized me and kept me from dying, got me out of the coma and all that. But then I was airlifted back to another ICU at Sunnybrook here in Toronto, and that's when I had a recovery team, and part of the recovery team was some really excellent caseworkers, psychologists, psychiatrists, people like that. It was part of the rotation, along with like a pain team and an organ team and a reconstruction team and physical therapy team and all these things. Like, it was amazing. And I spent time talking to the caseworkers and the folks that were much more concerned about my mental recovery, and they'd said a similar sort of a thing, that I just didn't seem to be repressing anything. Everything seemed fairly matter of fact to me, and I never thought of myself as that person. Honestly, before I got sick, I would have been horrified at the notion of even accidentally losing a finger in an accident or something. I would have felt so diminished. And here I was all messed up, and it's just kind of like, well, let's just see what happens tomorrow. One foot in front of the other, and let's get to work and see how much we can do. I'm not going to say it was fun, but it was strangely, I don't know, affirming. Yeah, I hate to make it sound like it was a positive thing, especially for people who've suffered a great deal, and there was a lot of pain and there was a lot of horror, but in my head, things were pretty straightforward. I had one job to do, and that was to go in a straight line as far as I could.
So flash forward to today. Any ongoing treatments or preventative measures to make sure your health is okay?
Well, it's different. I live an adaptive lifestyle. I need prosthetics to walk, but I do most of the things that I used to do. I can't run anymore. That never worked. But I can ski, and I used to do a little boxing, and so I still do that. I'm older and slower, and kind of funny looking, but I pull it off. And I try to stay physically active. I go up and down stairs. I use ladders. I use all that kind of stuff. So my life is more or less normal. From a health standpoint, there are some practical considerations. I monitor my heart because while my liver did recover, much to everybody's surprise, and while I did get my kidney functions back, again, much to everybody's surprise, we were never quite sure if there was damage to my heart walls or potential valvular damage. And so I scan for rhythmic issues and structural issues of my heart on a fairly regular basis, particularly if I'm starting to feel weak or sweaty or have strange pains. I always try to do that. I'm big on trying to collect data right when something is happening. The other big thing is I have to manage my weight because, as it turns out, if you put on weight, you can't get into your prosthetics. If you lose too much weight, they rattle around, they cause injuries. So if you want to be able to walk, like you can't put on 10 pounds. So, you're sort of stuck in this fixture. And again, I'm grateful, to be here, to get to participate in society, even with all the little challenges that come with being, physically handicapped and all these sorts of things. And I'm trying to play the long game. I'm trying to train for when I'm 85. It's like, will I be able to still stand on my own 2 feet? Will my heart be strong enough? Will my limbs be strong enough? Will I be able to hold my grandkids? Will I be able to take a set of stairs? And so you think about, well, what condition do I have to be in now? So that, even with the deterioration of age and invariably the deterioration of my my residual limbs, what's that going to be like? The leg that I'm left with doesn't work great. The knee is a miracle of rebuilt tissue. I've got skin grafts everywhere. They've moved muscles around. I've lost so much fascia because of the disease that I don't have good perfusion in a lot of areas in my extremities. I've got scarred arteries, which more easily collect plaque from cholesterol. So I have to watch out for stroke risk. So I have to really keep my cholesterol levels super low. And there are these things that you have to do to try to attempt to generate some additional longevity. And I see that as a way to respect the, let's say, the gift of additional time on the planet that I've been given. And I decided to treat it like a hobby rather than a burden. It's like a hobby. I'm always trying to learn about it, always trying to fool around with it. I'm always trying to just make it part of my day. It's like a hobby. I tinker with these questions of health. I even tinker with my prosthetics, and I take them apart and I try to re-engineer them and I build things on them. I drive my prosthetist nuts with this stuff, and it's fun. So, what can you do? It's this is who you are now. You got to adapt.
So I'm wondering, you mentioned you have to collect data on your heart.
Yes.
You're obviously no stranger to leading tech companies. Was your decision to take the reins at your current company? It's kind of a healthcare. Was that influenced by the challenges you've been facing?
The short answer is yes. My first love was biomedical engineering when I got out of engineering school. I tried to study as much of that as I could when I was in school. There really weren't any jobs at the time, so my career went in different directions, and I wound up, doing some software companies and things like that in the early days, and life was great. After I got sick, I couldn't go back to the company I was running at that point, and so I pulled back from that and sort of took my couple of years off to try to heal myself and get myself together. And then I got this opportunity to come join this tiny little but super smart company that was trying to go after diagnosis using sound. I think, stethoscopes. You can hear things. And stethoscope is kind of an anachronistic, old-fashioned style thing, and some doctors still use them a lot internationally, but here in North America, a little less. But there's all this information that's hidden, that comes out of their sounds your body makes, and some of those sounds are normal, and some of those sounds are abnormal. It's kind of like when your transmission's making a funny grinding noise. Something in there is going wrong. So the theory was, could we start to train machines not only to hear these sounds from the body, but sort of say that's valvular damage, or that is aortic stenosis, or that's atrial fibrillation. And these are things that happen to people, and that they come and go, and they're indications of early levels of disease or early levels of deterioration of your organs, in particular your heart. So yeah, how could I say no? I wanted to work. I never want to retire. I want to work for the rest of my life. But I want to do something that could help a lot of people, not just a few. And I didn't want to have another company where we were just helping companies make more money. I wanted to actually help normal people. And I thought, well, what do you know now that you didn't know before? Well, I know a little bit about engineering. I know a little bit about running technology companies. I know a little bit about finance. I know a lot more about being a patient now than I ever did before. I have this whole, you lie in a bed for weeks and weeks and weeks, watching it all go by, learning the vernacular, watching what nurses do, what medical assistants do, what med students do, what doctors do, what attendings do. Like, you learn all this stuff, and when you're in the hospital that long, as I'm sure you can appreciate. I'm like, wow, I know a lot about being a patient. I was like, what if we could create some products or some kind of a thing some kind of a tool that doesn't just help doctors, but actually helps patients help themselves? And that became the idea behind Stethophone, and it was irresistible. And again, it started out as a crazy idea and some early AI and a lot of real smart people who'd been working for years to try to perfect something conceptually, and then we got a chance to grow it up and make it into a company. And we're very excited about how it turned out. And it's the most meaningful work I've done in my life. And again, I'm just grateful for the chance to do it.
Speaking about helping people, I mentioned at the introduction that I started this project as a way to share my story and share other people's stories. I think last time we were chatting, you mentioned that you speak to people on behalf. Can you elaborate?
Well, there are two things. I mean, one is necrotizing fasciitis is actually still quite rare. And when you get it, if you get it bad enough, like I did, there's sort of a sequence of things that happen. So what started to happen was a couple of articles got written about my situation. I think one wound up in Toronto Life, and a couple on the internet, and a couple wound up in the press. And so people were seeking me out and calling me up to say, hey, look, my dad or my son or my wife or whatever has just been diagnosed with neck fasc. They're in septic shock. They're saying they're going to be in a coma for a while. I don't know what to do. I was researching it. The prognoses sound horrifying. Can you just talk to me for a while about what to expect and where to go and what's going to happen? And so, you'd find yourself very cautiously saying, look, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you what to do and how to feel. Your situation is yours, but I can tell you what happened to me and what my observations were. And I think even just that helped enormously. And then I've had a chance to come in, work with some of my former doctors and some of my recovery team to talk to people who were trying to make the final decision to amputate a limb. This was something that I had to decide, because initially they sort of saved my one leg, but it didn't work very well. It was going to be a disease vector forever. I was going to have chronic bone infections. It hurt, it looked terrible, and it just wasn't me. And so I was like, look, I think after all that effort, I had to go back to my surgeons and say, look, guys, thanks for all the work, but I think we have to cut this thing off. And you know, that's a wild experience, not only to go through, but to actually have to talk your doctors into, because you know their whole thing is like, well, come on, you know, you've got a leg, and I'm like, yeah, no, we got to take it off. So I've had the opportunity to go in and talk to some folks who needed to make a similar decision because they've been in a crushing accident, or maybe they've had a similar infection or a cancer or something. So on those two fronts, you know, every few weeks I end up in a conversation and try to help people. I did a couple of speaking engagements on these fronts. And really, I mean, all I'm doing is talking about what I observed and what I thought. And my main message to people who have been through these things, particularly if you're talking about limb amputation, is look, you know, it's not what you think. You know, your body is not you. You know, you are more than this. It doesn't make you, and we all say this, but it really doesn't diminish you. That's something that's completely in your own mind. And so if it's better to take the limb off, take the limb off, adapt, you'll be fine. It'll be okay. And you know, you're not going to be a different person necessarily on the other side of it. And this is really all I can offer, is that, you know, everyone's going to have a different experience with these things. But if you can get to that stage where you go, look, I am not my body. You know, I'm inhabiting my body. I'm going to have to adapt to my surroundings, and it'll make me better. You know, adaptation is what we do. It's what humans do. It's what we're supposed to be good at. And even if you're just talking about a few more months of life, or whether you're talking about the great unknown of how much more time have I got, you adapt to your situation. And what other choice do we really have? We can cry about it, we can give up, or we can adapt. Those are your three choices. Which person do you want to be?
Beautifully said.
That's it. That's the whole game right there. At least as far as I can tell. So it's always dangerous to give advice, and I try not to, but I'll share that thought with people because that's the thought that always helped me.
So what do you hope people will take away from this?
I don't know. I mean, I guess people think life is unfair. I don't look at it that way anymore. I've never really used that word, and I'm really happy that I didn't. I think things change, and you have to be prepared for that, and it can happen to anybody, and you got to go with it. I think that gratitude is a really big part of being present and being alive, and staying curious and interested in your surroundings, no matter what your condition is. As I tried to allude to earlier, there was a distinct point right when things were really bad where all I wanted was 15 minutes with my kids, and that would have been fine, you know. And you know, you can break it down to those moments. You can do all kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, you just, you know, every day is a gift, and nothing is worth, you know, getting angry about or ruining your day over, or dwelling on. The problems that we invent in our head are often much worse than the actual things that are going on around us. And frankly, it diminishes from your ability to actually help yourself and help other people when things really are dire. So, you know, shit happens. Don't waste time.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you again for sharing your time and your story. I know you're a busy guy. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. Your resilience and your approach to life are beyond reproach. So just again want to thank you very much.
It's very nice of you to say. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.